I think that's really similar to a lot of what our listeners would experience, right? Yes, they've got some leadership. They might be running a sales territory, but like they're the CEO of the territory. They've got to own what the output is for themselves. Each week, each month, and similarly, while it may not be the pressure of, hey, I've gone broke, but I've definitely got the pressure of I'm expected to produce these types of numbers week in, week out. Month in, month out, and if I'm not achieving those, the organization needs to look at your own role and say, hey, look, is this the right solution for you? Is it the right role?
I went totally virtual in a couple of ways. So, I mean, first of all, just because we've got a pandemic doesn't mean that people don't still need events, but it had to go virtual. Now, how does that translate for someone like an Illusionist?
Yeah, look, I think the first big thing that Sam's identified there is he is a service, right? He's got a product to offer. It's a service, and I think what's really interesting is very early on he realised he can't do it by himself. So bring in the experts, people that know things that he's obviously a master illusionist. He's got excellent business savvy. He knows what he wants to do. The 3 Ps, a lot of passion, but you can't do it all by yourself. And I think the other big one is, doing it for 20 years, you evolve. The product or the way you sell your product when you first start out is quite different. And I think as you've evolved, Sam, you're focused on corporate clients. That's a very different dance in terms of how you get the introduction, how you build rapport, how you understand what they want, and then ultimately delivering a service.
Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of business-to-business sales and how businesses can get the most out of their investment in salespeople, sales systems and processes, the lifeblood of any thriving organization. Join us as we explore a range of topics, as well as speak to some of the industry's thought leaders, vendors, success stories, and people who have just won and failed on their journey in business and sales. Before we get started, please do us a huge favor and click subscribe, follow or like wherever you're watching or listening to us. Also, please drop us a comment that you subscribed. We love to get to know our audience. Welcome everybody to the latest edition of GrowthPulse, the B2B Sales Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dan Bartels, and I'm here with my co-host, Simon. How are you, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, Dan. I'm really excited about today's show. It's going to be a really interesting journey into a different way that you need to think about selling.
Yeah, I think this is, so we've got Sam Powers, one of Australia's leading illusionists, in fact, the world's leading illusionists on, 5-time Magician of the Year award winner, global sensation. He's been on, Australia's Got Talent, and a whole host of other shows. He's run sort of 400 plus nights at a casino in Vegas, and all these different aspects of where you think about, people have these other careers, but sitting behind it, it's all about sales. You can't go and wow audiences in 21 different countries if you haven't fundamentally learned how to sell a product and sell an experience to people. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Sam and get an idea behind how great artists actually look at selling themselves, but also selling the experience that we have, but then also having those commercial conversations as well. I think that's a really intriguing piece for me to talk about. What about you, Simon? What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to it. Look, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before the show goes on, right? And we know this from selling software. There's enormous amount of preparation, know who's looking at your product, know why they're interested, know what's motivating them to get interested in what you've got to sell. And when you go live in the software world, that's the show. But I think there's a lot of similarities and parallels to entertainment and bringing together a whole bunch of different stakeholders around the vision you've got. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring Sam into the show. Sam, mate, welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Good morning, boys. Dan, Simon, good to see you both.
Yeah. Hey, Sam.
Mate, this is one of the most interesting conversations that we've had on the podcast so far. You're a master illusionist, is that correct?
You can put it that way. You call yourself an illusionist, you get paid 20% more. Otherwise, magician, kind of like next level down. So,
well, just in that concept, I think like that's a really interesting piece to drill into, right? Just for a moment, like how do you position yourself in your career or your company, your brand? I mean, we've seen so many different things in Simon and our career around sales, and sometimes just those really finite language pieces are really crucial and critical around what do you do to get the right messaging of what you're going to deliver to people. Is that something you spend a whole heap of time thinking about, or the industry thinks about?
Well, definitely. I think it's more so like, well, for starters, an illusionist is like a magician, but on a bigger scale. So it's kind of like it's sort of a grand scale version of a magician. But more specifically, when we're looking at niches that we're working in, I've got to target niches. So in the corporate market, I'm a corporate entertainment specialist. Because someone is booking me for, I don't know, AMP Christmas party for 800 guests. They want to know that this is what I do. I specialize in this, and that's my target niche that I'm the best at. But if I'm doing something else, for example, like on weddings, which I don't do many of anymore, but like I would say, yeah, Sam Powers, the magic, wedding specialist. You know what I mean? So that within each niche, you look like you're a specialist in that field. But the corporate market is certainly one of my biggest, sectors where I do a lot of work in that field.
Yep. Well, mate, I think it's probably worthwhile giving everybody a bit of a flavour of the work that you do. So we're going to chuck up on the screen now and watch a bit of your show reel. And I know some of this. I know you've got a brand new. Before you do that, you've got a brand new show coming out. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Put the show reel up.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a big production show called Club Vegas, the show, starting in Melbourne on September 1 at the Athenaeum Theatre. Then we head up to the Star on Gold Coast. It's basically a huge Las Vegas-style production show. We've got aerialists, we've got dancers, vocalists, and, of course, myself. So, yeah, it's going to be fun.
Mate, that's exciting. Well, let's chuck the show reel up and give everyone a view of this.
Phenomenal. I love magic. That was sick.
Well, his magic tricks left his school teachers spellbound at just 5 years of age, and ever since, Master Illusionist Sam Powers has been perfecting his extraordinary talents with the results to prove it. He's conjured up 5 Magician of the Year awards.
Now he's set to star alongside 6 of the industry's greatest illusionists on stage for the biggest magic show on the planet, the Illusionists 2.0 World Tour. Wow.
Mate, can't help it. It's the gig. I make people disappear. I can't help it showing off.
I love it. So, mate, look, you've spent an entire career. I mean, we went to school together, right? So, that's sort of our background and knowledge. You've spent an entire career, building out a business, a career as an illusionist. And it's not. It's an organization. It's a business. It's not just a pastime. So, tell us a bit about how you think about building a business and selling your product, selling your services. How do you think about that when you've got this experience delivery sitting around what you do?
Definitely. Look, it all starts with the dream at the very beginning. So, like, I didn't start out with 12 tons worth of gear in 3 warehouses, and 27 crew. It started out, that was the dream. So I began doing a lot of kids' birthday parties and smaller kind of close-up magic, gigs at restaurants, things like that, to eventually build the big international Sam Powers brand, where I can be, touring on the world's biggest stages and working at the largest corporate events in the world and for the biggest celebrities in the world. And so that's just, you got to build that out. You got to to get a lot of TV exposure, do all the morning shows, do all the talent shows, and and then hit the press. And so I got my first publicist when I was 23 years old, and just did the footy show and anything I could do to eventually build that brand and then disperse it into different sectors of the market.
So when you think about like all the brand building that you've done for your business and how you've built it and all those shows over time, that's a little bit like lead gen. This is about how do you build either the organizations or the individuals who want to look at the show. Is that really how you think about it as an artist, but also as a CEO of your company?
Well, certainly. I mean, when we're talking about lead gen, I mean, it's a little bit different to how you would normally perceive it in a different business. I mean, I'm a service. I'm essentially providing an experience and also memories. And so my lead gen really is getting out there in front of people, whether it's on TV or on social media, and they filter through inquiries through. They go, oh, Sam Powers, and they Google Sam Powers. There's the website that comes through, and so it's about converting. And they would normally be inquiring about, can you perform at my Telstra awards gala night, or my husband's 40th birthday party, or there might be a big tour that's coming up. Like, what, we can slot Sam Powers into this massive tour. That's kind of how that works. I've also got a sales team that reach out with it. I supply the warm to hot leads, and then they call out, and we, what's coming up for your next event and what you do last year and that kind of stuff. So it all kind of works in a very similar way, but just we're providing a different offering to the market.
Yeah, that's an amazing insight that I'd never really thought about for artists like yourself. That like you've got a sales team, you've got warm leads that you need to foster and manage, and you really need to learn how to run that engagement sales. So let's talk a little bit about that as an idea. So I mean, I know when you started off, you probably were definitely not thinking about being a salesperson or running a sales team as part of being an illusionist. How did that kind of evolution of in your business come about?
It all started in the very beginning. Like I mentioned before, I was doing kids' birthday parties. I started doing that when I was 14. And so, I was one of the first guys I knew to have a mobile phone when I was like 15 years of age. It was all brand new back then. And in between classes, I'd go to my locker and check my voicemail, and I would have to call back these clients and understand that, like, I'm not just describing what my show is. I am selling this as a service, as an experience to them, and identifying why I'm the best guy for the job. So it just started out with like literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those phone calls, and then realizing I'm actually a sales guy. Like, this is what I'm doing. I'm not just a magician anymore. I got into this for the rabbits and card tricks, but now I'm this like complete sales guy. And then I fast forward 20 years now. I'm now running a company with 27 staff and contractors, doing 400 shows a year at a casino, and I've got a marketing team. I've got sales reps on the road. I've got 180 tour operators, and we there's just a massive machine behind this to basically put bums on seats at a show that people are paying money for, to experience something they're going to remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an insight. I heard some statistics the other day around like Taylor Swift in particular. Hey, mate, I'm sure you never thought you'd be spoken about in the same breath as Taylor Swift, but it's a credit to the work you've done, right? But I mean, she's making $14 million per show profit, and when you think about like the organization has to go around that, the ticket sales, the corporate sales, the engagements, the partnerships, the modeling to make that work. As you went into building that, massive engagement from, with a casino, how did you go about thinking about the go-to-market? And a lot of our listeners, they're either in startups or they're, landing companies into region in particular. So it might be they've got a North American parent and they're growing an organization here, and building those partnerships and those early engagements are critical lessons for them. So how did you go about thinking from an almost standing start, how do I build this organization to sell this to a much bigger partner?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, it all starts with this, massive dream and this relentless pursuit to achieve it, right? And it's like the 3 Ps: passion, preparation, and persistence. And, and so I figured, well, I don't know all the answers, so let's team up and partner with people that do know the answers. So I would form a business partner that was able to, help pitch to investors and sponsors. And this particular show contract, which was 5 years and 2,000 shows, we had to find an investor for $250,000, 2 sponsors, which we found Channel 10 and the Hot FM radio to advertise the product on TV, radio, and then, and like literally build the machine up to this point where, I had to wake up every Monday morning and realize that if I did not make $20,000 that week, I would go broke. So we had a $20,000 break even each week for that show. And, but mate, we nailed it. And, we actually went broke in the first year, to be honest. And then we're like, okay, how do we fix this? What do we do? Where did we go wrong? And then reformulated the model, and then we killed it. So like I turned over my first $1 million year as a 28-year-old, bought a Lotus Exige Supercharged. And I was like, this is cool. And this is not from just being a magician. This is me having a very hands-on role in the business and the sales process and the marketing process, the graphic design and the brochures, the posters, the billboards, everything was very, very much hands-on, because I've never had independent management before. I've always run the business myself or with business partners, and just been very hands-on with that process.
I think that's really similar to a lot of what our listeners would experience, right? Yes, they've got some leadership. They might be running a sales territory, but like they're the CEO of the territory. They've got to own what the output is for themselves. Each week, each month, and similarly, while it may not be the pressure of, hey, I've gone broke, but I've definitely got the pressure of, I'm expected to produce these types of numbers week in, week out, month in, month out. And if I'm not achieving those, the organization needs to look at your own role and say, hey, look, is this the right solution for you? Is it the right role? Can we continue to invest? We probably don't have the same imperative of any small business owner, which is, I'm not sure if I can pay all the wages on Friday. Unless you've been a small business owner, you kind of don't have that experience. But it really is that driver behind running your own organization of that size. So
Absolutely.
As you've evolved your business over the last sort of, couple of months and years, etc., what are the things that you focus on most as being a business owner and in the sales function of your business? How do you think about it?
Well, I guess the other thing to consider as well is that as I grow and evolve, I need to evolve with the show. So, like I'm now in my 40s, and, it's a very physical job that I have, jumping out of boxes, jumping off cranes, and, being on stage with dancers. And so you need to kind of evolve in a way that your product offering suits where you are and what you are, to then, for example, in the corporate market. So my shift is now into a lot more of the corporate market. It's less grueling than touring and doing, a different city every night. And so, so now I've got a team that specifically target, corporate clients that have done big events before, that may not have, looked at the idea of an illusionist. Also moving into the field of MC work as well. So not only can I do the feature show, I can MC the entire event. And that's a relatively new thing over the past, more of a pandemic thing that I've done as well, because 100 out of 100 corporate events need an MC. But only about 1 out of 100 events would think about the idea of having an illusionist as entertainment. So now I'm just getting a bigger piece of the pie and evolving into that space as I'm kind of progressing through the years, if that makes sense.
The similarities between sort of what you think about and how do you look at different services are actually in so many different organizations today. Simon, we've been through the process of having big customers and thinking about how do we add new products to them. I mean, in our past, mate, we had ERP clients, and then we would think about adding CRM to them, or how do we add PSA, etc. And in that story that Sam was just talking about, which is how does he look out for these big corporate clients? I can sell them a show, or I can start to sell them a much bigger ongoing service and relationship. I think there's some real gold there to think about. How do we learn from everybody else? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think the first big thing that Sam's identified there is he is a service, right? He's got a product to offer. It's a service. And I think what's really interesting is very early on, he realized he can't do it by himself. So bring in the experts, people that know things that he's obviously a master illusionist. He's got excellent business savvy. He knows what he wants to do. The 3 Ps, a lot of passion. But you can't do it all by yourself. And I think the other big one is doing it for 20 years, you evolve. The product or the way you sell your product when you first start out is quite different. And I think as you've evolved, Sam, you're focused on corporate clients. That's a very different dance in terms of how you get the introduction, how you build rapport, how you understand what they want, and then ultimately delivering a service that delights and gets them to talk about you and spruiks your services onto other corporate clients. But I think you mentioned sort of going into that MC piece. I think a lot of similarities there, because I think as you mentioned, not too many corporates wake up in the morning and say I need an illusionist, but 100% of them need an MC. So you've actually identified precisely the product they're looking for, but your expertise is slightly adjacent to that. So you've actually put the two together and come up with a much better outcome for your corporate clients. And I think quite interestingly, once they see you MC, they think fantastic. But once they see the show and the Illusionist show that goes alongside it, you're probably blowing their mind. So it's really an interesting parallel, because I think I see salespeople every day that walk in and just try and sell one SKU, and they get themselves really caught up in the SKU they're trying to sell. Big difference is look at the customer, understand what it is that they need. You've probably got a number of services underneath that are, you're able to deliver, but look at it through their eyes. Understand they need an MC that's going to entertain the audience, and what other value-add services have you got that you can wrap into it, even though predominantly early on you might have thought your core business was Illusionist. Well, what gets you that gig is being able to talk about a broader picture. So it's really an interesting parallel for sure.
Definitely. And look, and it's a relationships business as well. The more the years go on, the more I realize it is such a relationships business. And when people know, like, and trust you and know that you deliver like every time, that's especially in that corporate market, you just get booked year and year again, and so you can be the best at what you do in the world, but if you suck at nurturing a relationship, you're just not going to come back. And so for me, that's been a really big learning curve over the years. I started this 27 years ago thinking, yep, I'll just be the best, everyone's going to book me. Doesn't matter. It's building and nurturing relationships during the whole process as well.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, how many sales guys have you seen that say they're the best and they expect to sell all the software?
All the time, mate. I think that's a really common piece of salespeople move between different roles and organizations. You see one CEO who's built a company and then he sells it a couple of years later and they've got to start again. And that's what they do through their career, and some will work and some won't. And I think it's always interesting watching someone who's had a company for a long period of time and how they've really built that, we talk about it being a go-to-market. How do you kind of evolve what the market needs? And I know, Sam, it must have been the last couple of years must have been really tough for you being a face-to-face sort of experiential entertainer, having to change and shut down your business and then kind of restart them again. I know for a lot of the entertainment world, that was a really tough period. So kind of how did you think about that problem? And I think the insight I want to find for our listeners is, things happen and change in your organization. And, whether you build a new product or there's a new constraint or a new competitor or a new environment, like how do you approach that and how do you think about your organization? How did you go about that time period?
Well, we've all overused the word pivot, right? But in terms of what I did, it wasn't just a pivot; it was a full ballerina extravaganza. I went totally virtual in a couple of ways. So, I mean, first of all, just because we've got a pandemic doesn't mean that people don't still need events, but it had to go virtual. Now, how does that translate for someone like an Illusionist? It actually translates really well, because when I'm doing promo for tours, I'm entertaining through a TV screen to my audience. And it's pretty much just like that. And because we can now talk to the audience through a screen, through a Zoom or through a Teams, now we have interaction. And so that actually worked really well for me. Obviously not as fun as being live and on a stage, but in terms of, doing virtual shows, that worked really well. It's funny now because we have what's called hybrid events. And so they would have part of the event live and part everyone's going on Zoom. So I now have a full kind of like recording studio with green screens and everything where I would go and do these virtual shows. And I've got, the auto cue that rolls up just like in Channel 9 studios. And we have big production. And so even to this day, we still have some hybrid events. We go there and do it. And, it's kind of like an extra string to add to your bow in terms of your product offering. And that's what we did. We also did this massive, huge online competition called Cyber Magic Superstar, the world's biggest online magic competition, where we immediately went into this thing where we had 3 of the world's best magicians that were on a judging panel. We had a $10,000 cash prize. And we had like hundreds and hundreds of magicians from all around the world enter by putting like a 90-second video in the hope to win these prizes. We interviewed Facebook Live magicians every single day of some of the world's best magicians. And that was like I was working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4 months on that project, just as an instant pivot, and also raising money for charity at the same time. All the money we raised went into get PPE for the frontline workers. And so, yeah, that was like an instant pivot, because it's either that or sit around twiddling your thumbs, driving a truck, or loading shelves at a supermarket, which a lot of people had to do in my industry. So yeah, that was a massive pivot for us.
I think it's, again, the insight here is things happen to your industry. Like the conditions change. I mean, if I think about, Simon and I are predominantly from the technology space, right? AI has changed the way that all of our customers talk and think about software. If there isn't a flavor of AI in it, am I going to invest in that moving forward? Now, you may not have that currently in your kit bag, but the organization needs to evolve into that space and understand how to sell. How are your customers changed? How have their expectations changed? What's happening from their world that is going to influence what you can deliver to them? Because the reality was, you could still choose to go out there and try and be an illusionist face to face. Just no one was buying that. So if they're not buying that, how do you change the product set? How do you change the mix? One of the other pieces I think is interesting for me to understand in your space. You've performed all over the world. I mentioned before, I think it's 21 countries you've performed in.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
How do the experience in different countries translate? Do you have to think about kind of sort of any regional or experiential changes per country or per region? Is that a thing that's relevant?
Oh, absolutely. And before I jump onto that, I want to rewind one little baby step to the AI. AI for my business, absolutely incredible. When we're developing show pitches for big production shows, AI, I can speak into it. It will generate images, ideas to paint the picture of the show. It'll I would say, like, write me a show description to describe a death-defying show with levitations and escape. It'll write this most incredible thing, and all of a sudden, what would normally take me probably 10 hours to pull a deck together takes me 2. And so productivity just goes straight up. That's the AI thing. I sort of jump back onto that. In terms of regions and stuff like that, there's a big show called The Illusionist. It's the biggest touring magic show on earth. They've sold more tickets in Broadway history than any other magic show. And we've traveled all different types of countries. Asia, for example, they just love magic. They go nuts. But places like Saudi, they believe in black magic, and it's a big conspiracy for them that we're toying with the dark arts. And we have protesters outside the theatre protesting against the show because we're in league with the devil and all these crazy things. Are different cultures, certainly when it comes to magic. Even when I was working in the United States, there were some jokes and some lines and some words that I had to change because they were offensive to or not understood by American audiences. So you just got to blend and adapt, understand where you are, what the culture is, and things like that. For example, Americans, they've got Kmart over there, but they don't know what that means unless you say Kmart, and you just got to change a couple of words around so they go, oh, that's what he means, because we're talking gibberish otherwise. So little things like that.
Simon and I have sold for almost 20 years selling American software, or you sell German software as well, Simon, into the Australian marketplace. And one of the things that we harp on about to our colleagues overseas on such a regular basis is we normally use the term localization, but I think it's a translation, or it's an evolution of what your pitch and your product and your go-to-market is. And it's so, when I hear it talked, is you're mentioning it in that cultural aspect of black magic versus, fundamental understandings in a community. It's exactly what we see in every single engagement we've had in our world.
100%.
Simon, do you agree?
Yeah, look, it's unbelievable. I think, yeah, you're right. We call it localization, but it's the art of understanding your audience. And I think quite often you don't see that spelt out. But us being Australians working for American companies, we understand Americans probably way better than they understand us. So it puts us in a fairly unique position, because I think we're obviously bombarded with a lot of American culture. So we kind of know, Kmart. We know those sort of things, but flip it in reverse. And I think, it's incumbent on certainly Australians selling to American software in Australia to actually understand the differences and the nuances. And that's the art of it. I think, we often talk about, the art and the science of selling. I look, Sam, there's some enormous parallels that you've just highlighted. We've talked about the art of illusion. I'm curious about the science of illusion. Is there a particular science that you go? I mean, I'm not asking you to break any secrets, etc. But
Tell
clearly,
us how you do it.
yeah, there clearly is two parts of what you do, right? And I
Yeah,
know
of
as a
course.
salesperson, there's the art of my presentation. There's the art of me spelling out why my customer needs it. But then underlying that, there's the science and the diligence of putting it all together, knowing that sales is a lot about psychology. How do I put those pieces together and get the right outcome? How do you think about the science and the art of it, of what you do?
Also, just firstly on the science of like magic and science. So basically, magic and illusion always has to be one step ahead of science. So, for example, if we rewound the clock 50 years and then whipped out an iPad, people would think we're a witch. Like, what is this? What's this magical device? And so, you think of it that way. So basically, magic is always one step ahead of science, because science is always like blows us away. So magic needs to keep on evolving in that respect. And there's a lot of science behind magic. It's a bit of a weird thing. People ask me, like, how do you come up with new illusions of magic? And I always bring it back to when you're a musician and you can write music. When you get good at playing the instrument, you can now learn how to write the music and create your own music. It's the same thing with magic, but completely different way. So I hope that kind of answers your question as to the science, in terms of the science of how to like then sell a product, sell an experience. Like I always thought, well, it's the best magic show. That's how we sell it. You're selling memories. You're making your events an unforgettable success. You're selling that, not the actual show itself. The show goes without saying. And so essentially, yeah, so we are in the business of selling unforgettable memories for various events. That's when we're talking corporate. That's really, in terms of a live show, what are we selling? Where people want to feel something. Why do we go to a rock concert? Why do we go to a movie? Like, we want to feel the emotions, the happiness, the sadness, the joy, the laughter. Now traditionally magicians and illusionists can only evoke one emotion, and that's wonder. So but when you know how to be a storyteller and evoke all the emotions, you have better success as an entertainer. That's why guys like David Copperfield are doing so well. He's earning $70 million a year, still doing 648 shows a year. And you watch his show, you've got grown men in the front row crying because David is flying through the air, reminding them of their dreams of flying as a child. And it's completely, they're suspending their disbelief and going back to their childhood when everything was magic. And for someone, like us, we've got all the stress and worries of life and business and everything. Just to have that removed for that short amount of time is just absolute pure wonder. It's just perfection.
Outstanding. And it's really interesting, because I think, I think about sales as it's the art of psychology. So, understanding what's motivating the person you're selling to, understand what excites them, what wows them, and I think once you've got that emotional hook in a sale, you're 3/4 of the way there. You obviously got to have a good product to sell, but there must be a hell of a lot of psychology going around in terms of how you design your shows and how you sell the experience, because I mean it's all about people's inner desires, what they really want, what they're not necessarily willing to tell you, but you eke that out, and you come up with a message and a delivery and a show that really piques them at a deep psychological level.
Oh, absolutely. And what I find equally as fascinating, back to the pivot on the pandemic, I also went straight to uni because I always thought, what would have happened if I got a marketing degree? So I went straight to Sydney University, enrolled in commerce, majoring in marketing. I got 2 years through a marketing degree, and pulling up the bonnet, seeing what's underneath there, blew my mind. I thought marketing was just selling, and like there is a whole world there to learn about. And so I've had to put the degree on hold because all the shows are back. But for me, just understanding that process 2 years into a hardcore marketing degree was just so fascinating because I love knowing how things work. Like I said, the psychology, your customer avatar, what makes them make decisions, what are the emotional triggers to make them buy something, and how do you fulfill their needs, and the machine behind that is just like, really, for me, that's mind blowing. For everyone else, the magic I do is mind blowing. That's just boring for me. But this stuff here is really what fascinates me a lot. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think, Sam, the bit that intrigued me about coming to talk to you about what you do is, in the software space that we've been in for a long time, sort of the ultimate model is when you sign a long-term subscription customer. And we talk about it in terms of, I might have signed a multi-year deal with someone, and then are they going to renew and keep that piece going? And I think it's, when you're an artist, you really try and build a product once. I mean, even though you would go and do a show many times, that show is repeated and you refine it and you refine it. But it's the delivery of that one show, but you're also capturing the attention and the aspirations of your customer base. And hopefully you can capture it once, and then they become a repeat customer of yours many times. They watch you online, they turn into your shows, they buy multiple tickets, they tell others about it. And in the business to business world, like, that's exactly what we're trying to do all the time. And I've always been intrigued by artists. I think musicians are probably the one that you see most often or hear most often. They make that they write that piece of music once, but it's sold and it's subscribed to now, especially in the streaming world. It's subscribed and replayed by their best customers again and again and again. I mean, in my car, I hate to say it, my daughter's a huge Taylor Swift fan. I reckon I'm paying more money to Taylor Swift than most people in the country right now. But it's happening. She's that piece of, how do I get that regular engagement and revenue from a core customer base, is central to what artists try to achieve over a long period of time. How do you, in the space of being an illusionist who is predominantly looking at stage shows, how do you think about kind of that problem and that recurring revenue piece or ongoing revenue piece from your customers? How do you think about it?
It's funny you bring that up because, many years ago, I was hired to do a girl's 18th birthday party in Melbourne. Now, there's probably 100 magicians in Melbourne, but the power of TV, put me in front of them, and I got hired to do her 18th. 3 years later, and by the way, she's a beautiful big mansion. It's like a house in the Hollywood Hills. It was ridiculous. And it was one of those wild parties. 3 years later, I get a phone call from the same client. Oh, hi, she's turning 21. Would love to have you back. And so I got booked for her 21st. Wow. And, obviously, that relationship was there. And I always follow up with the client afterwards, make sure they're happy and all that. Fast forward 10 years, I get another phone call. Oh, it's her 30th. Would love to fly you back. And so I flew down
Wow.
to Melbourne for this girl's 18th, her 21st, and her 30th. And, it's just one of many stories I have about clients who just know that, like, when they know that you care, it's not just about delivering the product or service. You really have that relationship. And yeah, they could have chosen one of 100 other magicians in Melbourne without having to fly them and accommodate them and pay the transfers and all that kind of stuff. But that stuff really does mean a lot to me, to know that the client thinks enough of me and the relationships I built with them and what I've delivered to book me 3 in a row for 13 years for 3 events. So plenty of stories like that, for sure.
That's an awesome story. So Sam, tell me, as you evolve, have you started planning her 50th yet?
Well, I think it's gonna be the 40th next, then the 50th. By then, I think I'll be doing magic with a cane and a walking stick. So, yeah. But I hope I get a call for a 40th.
That's long. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. No, it'll be good. Be a full.
That's amazing. So, it is a big part of, how does anyone build, whether it's a software sales career, whether it's a small business, how do you build those long-term customers? I was doing some consulting in the last couple of weeks with a small design company, and a big insight for them was they've got this amazing list of existing customers, but so many of their engagements were focused on just the first one, and what they've shifted their viewpoint is, how do we look at that existing customer base and work out, same as you were doing, about, okay, now I've got an existing customer, I've had to run a show for them, but hold on, can I do many other events for them? How do I expand my offerings? That's exactly what they're looking at in terms of how do they expand their offerings? How do they have a larger conversation with those customers who already trust them? And I think that's inherent in any really strong business that's been around for a while. They really care about the outcomes and the welfare of their customers, and then they focus on, how else can I provide new experiences, new services that hit your outcomes. I mean, when you build your shows, and Simon sort of asked a similar question before, maybe, I know when I buy from artists, like I've been to a couple of great concerts in the last few years, and I have to call out the Elton John show. My daughter and I are huge Elton John fans, and we one of her lullabies as a kid was Your Song, right? And I've sung it to her, I don't know, 10,000 times. That experience for us as going to see his show, I'd pay a ridiculous amount of money to sit up the front, and because that was so emotive for me. How do you think about building that emotive piece into your shows, or how do you think about marketing and selling that to your customers?
Well, again, it's funny you mentioned that too, because I did a gig at the multi-million-dollar Packer wedding, and they hired Elton John just to sing for their wedding dance, right? And wow. It was like $1.1 million, and but I stuck around as a guest, and I was there, Cuban cigar, Elton John, I had Human Nature, and that's just a side Elton John story. But I get why you're such a fan, because what a legend. But back to your story. Look, I think how do we build that emotive thing? Yeah, like I remember the first really cool car I bought, right? It was because I drove a Magic Sam van for 10 years, right? From when I was like 17 to like 26 or something. And it was horrible, but this is how I started. I tried taking a girl out on a date in a van. Anyway, then I bought my first really cool car. And I remember how the sales guy sold it to me. And he put me into the emotional mindset and experience of owning that car. He identified what I'm going to use the car for. I'm going to tow my 3-ton touring van trailer. I'm going to be driving on the road to gigs. And he said, now imagine you're towing the trailer, you're on your way to these gigs. And he emotionally hooked me and sold me on this thing. It wasn't a transactional sale. It was like he emotionally sold me and made me feel what it was like to own that and envision it. I was like, sold, and I bought the thing. And I really reflect on that, because that was a big lesson for me. I've since done tons of sales courses like Jordan Belfort and a bunch of guys, and realizing that it is an emotional trigger when you're selling to someone. And so for me, I'm selling that experience. So when the events finish, we get standing ovations 9 times out of 10. Imagine the clients come back to you say, hey, thank you so much for putting on that event. We had such a great time. That guy, wow, he was amazing. It's not about me. It's about the client and the memories that they have been able to create for all their guests that night to make that event a success. We're trying to approach it from that angle so that they know they're going to be the hero at the end and, be responsible for such an awesome event, which is pretty much how it goes. I hope that answers your question, maybe.
We're kind of getting to the top of the hour now, and normally we just ask our guests kind of the key takeaways, but I actually want to expand it and give ourselves a couple. I've learned so much from this conversation. And so I want Simon, myself, and you to kind of share out of this conversation, what our key takeaways. Simon, I'll let you go first. Like out of this conversation, what are the key lessons or takeaways you've got for our audience? Sorry.
Well, look, I think, number one, selling is all about the experience of the customer. It has to be.
Yeah.
And I think all too often in sales, it's about the salesperson rather than the outcome that you're delivering for the customer. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're selling entertainment, software, anything, cars. look, that car sales story is spot on. So the experience of the customer is actually what they're buying. They're not buying the salesperson. That's a massive lesson. Dan, over to you.
Yeah, I'll share my sort of key lesson out of this, which is, I always remind myself how much I can learn from people who are similar but not exactly the same in what I do. And how do I look at the illusionists in my life, the doctors, the teachers, all of them have got an experience with humans, with sales, of selling a problem. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, and the things that I learned from her in terms of how she relates to parents in her class who are looking at, she's tasked with looking after the most valuable thing for them, which is the lives of their 5-year-olds. She's a kindergarten teacher, and she has to sell for them often, like, what is the program we put your child on, and these things are okay. And the things that I learned from her, I'm consistently surprised by. And I think it's a really important thing that we as salespeople do, is we learn from all of those around us. I mean, Sam, what are some of the, out of this conversation, or what are the key messages you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, sure. I think what Simon identified there is really important as well, because that customer journey from the very beginning to the very end is so crucial every single step of the way. Like, even when I'm running a ticketed show, I train my box office staff. I said, their first experience of this product is you coming to the counter to collect their tickets or buy their tickets, explaining what the show is, to then my ushers bringing the audience down into their seats. That is also the next part of the experience. Then the pre-show, what's playing on the screens on stage, or their experience going to the bar, and then the actual show itself, all the way down to the meet and greet that I do after the show, signing posters, taking photos, making sure I meet the audience, making sure that I care and I'm invested about them. So there are so many parts of that customer journey that are so important, even from buying the tickets to even the portal to purchase their tickets with their credit cards. All has to be part of this entire bigger picture to give them a really, really good experience, to make sure that they will come back, they'll do it again, and you're really offering them that all-round great experience on every single level across the customer journey.
Mate, I'm blown away.
Yep.
This conversation has exceeded my expectations, and I hope it has for all of our listeners. Sam, I want to make sure we give you a final plug. You've obviously got the new show coming up. sampowers.com.au for people who want to book you. Please, jump on there and check it out. But I won't take the wind out of your sails on your show. They'll give it one more plug before we kind of wrap up.
Well, that's the ticketed show right now. It's called Club Vegas. We're playing in Melbourne at the Athenaeum Theatre starting September 1. Then we're up on the Star on the Gold Coast, October. Don't quote me now. It's the first or second week in October, so you can Google that. But more importantly, we do a whole bunch of types of events, from corporate events to private parties to product launches to awards nights. Everything from mingling close-up magic at cocktail parties where there's no stage or production required, to massive big stage shows. And we've got packages that come in quite affordable to big extravagant packages. So any event, no matter how large or small, that's really what we specialize in that corporate space. And yet you got the website, sampowers.com.au. Love to be there and make it awesome for you guys.
Sam, Simon, thank you so much for today's session. As I said, it's blown away. My expectations have been completely surpassed in terms of what this conversation would be. So it's fantastic. For all of our listeners, look, please, and if you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, like, just chuck us a comment down below. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give us 5 stars and drop a comment. Share the podcast with your friends. And this is all about how do we share knowledge in making you a better salesperson, helping your organization. Sam, Simon, thanks for your time today. Everyone, thanks so much.